Number 10. The Sinkhole. In early 2023, 3 cars fell into a random sinkhole on a closed road, leaving California cops absolutely speechless. Another 3 cars fell into the exact same sinkhole even though the road was clearly barricaded off. There were signs everywhere saying road closed, and yet 3 drivers managed to ignore the signs, drive down the road, and fall into the sinkhole. It all started on January 17th, when California Highway Patrol announced a long-term closure of Casson Road. The issue was that a retention pond had caused the roadway to erode, resulting in a collapse. Authorities put up barricades and told the public to stay away, but multiple people ignored the warnings. The first crash occurred on the same day the road closed when an SUV drove into the sinkhole and wound up submerged in floodwater. 9 days later, a silver sedan plunged into the sinkhole as well, and the last wreck took place when a 4-door pickup truck drove off the edge of a very large and noticeable sinkhole and crashed. If any of these individuals were trying to get to work, chances are they missed the day. We can only hope their insurance covers driving down closed roads and falling into holes. Number 9. The Duel Heist. A Brinks armored truck was on its way to a jewelry show when it was robbed on July 11, 2022. It happened near Los Angeles as the gems were being transported to a prestigious event at the Pasadena Convention Center. And the robbers got away with an astounding $10 million in jewels. Entire livelihoods were taken out of the back of the truck, causing 18 vendors' lives to be destroyed in an instant. Even though Brinks did say they would reimburse everyone who was robbed as per the terms of their contracts, it was still devastating. Many of the vendors had been building their jewel inventory for over the past 40 years. They thought their jewels would be put on display at the convention, but they never even arrived at the destination. Brandy Swanson, the manager of the International Gem and Jewelry Show, told the New York Times that the victims had their entire lives stolen that day. She stated that many of the vendors are completely done and out of the business for good even after they were reimbursed. Brandy added that an estimated 30 bags were lifted from the truck during the heist. That sounds like a lot, but they missed the other 50 or so bags. The total worth of all the jewels was around $100 million. Amazingly, they never even caught the people who did it. So unfortunately, the jewels are still missing. Number 8. Prank gone wrong. A gas station clerk survived a horrible situation when a preteen with a gun ruined her day. The clerk at the Hartford, Michigan gas station didn't even realize she was being robbed when it happened to her in 2022. She stared at the preteen across the counter and at the gun he held in his hands and thought she was being pranked. The clerk told News Channel 3 that the robber looked like he wasn't even 10 years old, but she'd find out later from the Hartford police that he was a 12-year-old middle schooler. The boy was never identified because of his age, but we do know he was charged with 6 felonies at the local family court following the brazen daylight robbery. The kid walked into the gas station and pointed the gun at the clerk, but the store employee didn't immediately give him the money. She realized the ordeal was more than a prank, however, when the preteen aimed the gun at the ceiling and let off a warning shot. The clerk just so happened to have a daughter about the same age as the boy who fired a bullet through the ceiling. She couldn't believe what was happening, though the gunshot did trigger her instincts. She then handed over the money and the robber fled the scene, but luckily he was arrested by the police about a block away. When speaking with locals, it became clear that this wasn't his first encounter with the law. Local resident Lisa Riley said she was familiar with the boy because he lived in her neighborhood. 2 years before the robbery, when he was just 10 years old, Lisa said he fired at her with a BB gun while she mowed her lawn. As for where he got the gun, Hartford police say he took it from his grandfather. Number 7. Kidnapping the dog breeder. A dog breeder in Florida likely had one of the worst days of his life when 3 men kidnapped him in 2022. The victim lived in Port St. Lucie, which is located roughly 40 miles from West Palm Beach. He became the point of interest of 3 brazen criminals when he boasted about his dog breeding business on social media. The trio of criminals pretended to be interested in purchasing a puppy. According to the sheriff's office, they then showed up at his house, beat him, stole his stuff, and demanded that he hand over a huge amount of cash. The home invasion reportedly lasted 2 miserable days. They kept moving him around, taking him from place to place, and forcing him to drive. Fortunately, though, the dog breeder finally worked out a sneaky plan to save himself. It was about 10:30 p.m. when the kidnappers forced the victim to drive through Martin County. The victim tried to drive as erratically as possible to get the attention of any nearby cops. He was speeding and swerving as if he were drunk, and eventually he caught the attention of a deputy. Officer Cameron White pulled him over and then gave him a warning. But before he walked back to his squad car, White had the inclination that something was wrong. The victim was terrified to say anything outright, but gave the cop such a look of desperation and despair that the officer asked the victim to step out of the vehicle. It was at this moment that White discovered guns, knives, and a huge amount of cash in the car. The 3 kidnappers, who were all in their early 20s, were subsequently arrested. They've now been charged with multiple counts of kidnapping and carjacking, home invasion, and armed burglary. Who knows what would have happened to the poor victim if he hadn't caught the attention of the deputy. Number 6. Crash on Beaver Island. An 11-year-old girl had the worst day imaginable in November of 2021. She was the only survivor of a commuter plane that crashed on an island in Lake Michigan. Her father was killed, and the other 3 people aboard the plane died too. But the 11-year-old girl miraculously survived. Her name is Lainey, and she was traveling with her father from Charlevoix to Beaver Island. The aircraft was landing at the airport when it experienced a malfunction and crashed. The young girl's father, a realtor named Mike, died while protecting his daughter. He had her embraced in a bear hug when the plane crashed, saving her life with his own body. The other victims were the pilot, whose name was withheld, and a couple identified as Kate Lease and Adam Kendall, who'd recently moved to Beaver Island to run a vineyard. And while 11-year-old Lainey did survive and is now physically fine, the trauma of that awful day will likely stay with her for the rest of her life. Number 5. Capsized in the Atlantic. A French sailor in his early 60s had the most miserable 16 hours of his life when his boat capsized in the Atlantic Ocean in early August 2022. The sailor had set off from Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, but he sent out a distress signal late on a Monday evening shortly after starting his journey. When Spanish Coast Guards found the boat, it was upside down and the sea was too rough for them to pull him out of the water. They couldn't rescue the sailor without risking their own lives, so the man was forced to spend the entire night stuck underneath the sailboat in a tiny air pocket. Eventually, though, the Coast Guard attached buoyancy balloons to the overturned boat so that it wouldn't completely sink. The sailor then sent the distress signal at 8:23 p.m. from a location that was 14 nautical miles from Sargassos Islands. But unfortunately for him, it would take a full 16 hours for him to be rescued. That might not sound too bad, but just imagine how grueling that must have been. You think your day's going bad? Well, this guy literally had to cling to the inside of his overturned boat that was almost totally submerged in the Atlantic Ocean, all while breathing in a bubble for 2 back-to-back 8-hour shifts. Number 4. Into a volcano. A woman's skiing trip with her husband in 2020 turned into a fight for her life when she fell into the mouth of a volcano. Portland resident Caroline Sunbaum thought she was going to have a fantastic skiing trip at Mount Hood in Oregon, but things didn't go exactly as she was expecting. Mount Hood might seem like a calm, icy giant, but in reality, it's an active volcano. At the top of the mountain are the vents that spit out steam and gas. Its slopes are covered in snow and ice, but its interior is a rioting belly of magma. Caroline was skiing when she fell right into a fumarole, which is a fancy word for vent. According to Caroline herself, it felt like someone pulled a chair out from underneath her. She tumbled into the vent, but luckily it wasn't too deep. Stranded at the bottom of the pit, it looked like the snow might fall from the edges and bury her in an avalanche. At the same time, there was the bitter stench of rotten eggs from the dangerous fumes leaking out around her. It was extremely lucky that someone witnessed what happened. A good Samaritan had been skiing nearby, and with a rope, they were able to pull Caroline out of the vent. It happened quickly enough that Caroline didn't suffocate on the toxic air being pushed out of the fumarole. Getting stuck inside a volcanic vent is kind of like sticking your mouth on the exhaust pipe of a running car. If nobody had seen her fall into that hole, she may never have been seen again. Number 3, lost in the jungle. At the end of summer 2021, a 72-year-old British man in Thailand got lost in the jungle. What started as a fun day on a motorbike turned into 3 days of excruciating suffering. Barry Leonard Weller set off on his motorbike to visit friends and was discovered 3 days later by a local hunter in a remote forest. A hunter named Natapat Tadi came across Barry passed out on a rock formation. When he came to, Barry said he hadn't eaten anything in 3 days and claimed that he'd only drinking water from puddles he found on the ground. He'd lost his shoes somehow and had cuts all over his legs, and he was dressed in shorts and an open shirt like he was anticipating a day at the beach. Luckily for Barry, he was in a relationship with a local woman at the time. He left her place to meet his friends, but he never came back home and his buddies had no idea where he was. His partner became concerned and eventually called the authorities, who sent out a search party. Natapat Tadi was one of the volunteers who went looking for the British man. Barry had been living in Thailand for 15 years and was used to finding his way around. But on this day, for no real reason, he took a different route than usual. It's not clear how he managed it, but he left the road and got completely turned around. He walked so deep into the jungle that he couldn't find his way out again. He's lucky to have been rescued, and he was fortunate a tiger didn't find him before the search party. Number 2, the boy in the sewer. Joe is a young boy in Germany who had the adventure of a lifetime when he got stuck in a sewer for over a week in June 2022 when he was only 8 years old. He was reported missing on the 17th and was found in the sewer 8 days later in the northwestern German town of Oldenburg. When he was finally rescued, Joe was only 1,000 feet from his house. He was discovered after a passerby reported hearing strange noises coming from a manhole cover. He was on the brink of death when he was pulled to safety, but thankfully he was saved just in time. He had to be taken to the nearby hospital and was treated for serious dehydration and deadly hypothermia. The police said nobody except the boy was involved in the incident. Joe had apparently wandered out of his house and decided to explore a sewer out of curiosity, but he unintentionally got stuck down there and couldn't get out. He likely entered through a concrete drainage pipe and became lost within minutes. The next time you're stewing about your bad day, just remember the boy who spent over a week stuck in a sewer pipe. Number 1, saved by a ball. A man identified only as Ivan was enjoying a Greek holiday during the summer of 2022. Everything was going fantastic for the man. The sun was shining and he was enjoying the beautiful island of Cassandra. And in that moment, he felt that life couldn't get much better. But then, he was hit by a wave and was swept out to sea. Ivan and 2 other men were messing around near the beach when suddenly they were swept off their feet to parts unknown. The Greek Coast Guard acted quickly and discovered 2 of the missing men, but they couldn't find Ivan. What happened next was nothing short of a miracle. 10 days earlier, a pair of young boys were playing with a large inflatable ball on the beach. They lost that ball in the sea, and it was carried off just like Ivan was. Ivan and the ball then crossed paths out in the turbulent waters, and the man was able to cling to it for 18 hours while floating aimlessly. The 2 boys who lost the ball hadn't even been at the same place. They were 80 miles away on the island of Lemnos. Their missing ball traveled all the way across the sea, only to wind up right in Ivan's arms. If it hadn't been for that ball, Ivan certainly would have drowned. But he clung to that thing for dear life for 18 hours until he was finally spotted by a Greek Air Force helicopter that plucked him from the water and carried him to safety. How do we know all this? The mother of the boys who lost their ball recognized the object on Greek TV. Such a seemingly unimportant ball became an unlikely hero, and Ivan's awful day at sea wound up setting the stage for a life-saving miracle. Would you rather be stranded at sea or get lost deep in the jungle? Which do you think you'd have a better chance at surviving? Let us know in the comments, and remember, subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.